Before we begin, take a quiet moment. Where are you listening from right now? What time is it where you are? Perhaps it is late at night. Perhaps the world around you is already asleep. Or perhaps you are alone with a soft light nearby, letting the day fade. Wherever you are, let this moment slow down. Let the noise of the present grow distant. Tonight, we step away from the modern world. Tonight, we walk quietly into medieval Europe. In the hush of a medieval night, the village sleeps under a star-pierced sky. A silvery moon sails above fields of wheat bowed by darkness. A gentle breeze stirs the thatch, and embers flicker in stone hearths. In the distance, an owl calls softly. The world holds its silence, and under the soft lantern glow, a quiet journey through age-old nights begins. In a modest cottage, the dawn awakens. Light streams through a small window to reveal the hearth, where a woman tends a simmering pot of barley porridge. The air smells of grain and smoke. She holds a wooden spoon in worn fingers, dipping it into the thin stew. Each morning, she rouses her young daughters to share the thick broth, and they drink in silence. The porridge is plain, with scarcely a pinch of salt or herb's flavour is a distant thought. This morning meal sustains them against empty stomachs. It is lifeblood and nothing more. For this mother, each day begins not with joy at savoury pleasures, but with gratitude for the mere warmth and energy it brings. Outside, a young farmer rises as well. He steps out of the thatch-roofed cottage into the crisp morning air. His stomach grumbles for the work ahead. He cracks a crust of coarse brown bread between his teeth, biting slowly to make it last, and washes it down with small swigs of ale brewed from weak barley. There is no spice in his life of toil. Each bite is plain and functional. As he turns to tend his oxen for ploughing, hunger becomes his companion. Every mouthful is swallowed with the thought of tomorrow's labour. In this quiet morning, food is fuel and nothing more, each morsel earned and devoured without celebration. Throughout the village, people live by the same rhythm. Every meal is quiet cooperation with hunger, never a feast of celebration. When tasks slow in the midday sun, they remember the simple hope of warm bread. From the little communal oven comes a gentle heat that signals promise. Faces press at doorways at this smell, imagining loaves fresh from the coals. Bread is the measure of their day's work and the anchor of their life. It is the small promise that turns hunger in their bellies into patience. In the quiet hours before dawn, the baker begins. Kneeling on the earthen floor of a low-ceiling bakehouse, he sifts a mixture of coarse grains, dark rye, barley grist, and if fortunate, a precious scoop of milled wheat. He pours water from a clay jug onto the meal and works it into a sticky dough. The muscles in his arms arc and fold the rough mixture between fingers to the steady rhythm of his labour. The room smells of damp flour and warm earth. Nearby, an apprentice tends a steady wood fire, stoked within a stone oven, coaxing it with bellows until its cavern glows with golden heat. Floured hands cradle the risen dough into round loaves, and one by one they are slid onto the blazing hearth with a quick, practiced scoop of a wooden peel. The heat is fierce, and as the crusts form a deep brown, the village breathes out in shared anticipation. From the fiery hearth, loaves emerge one by one. They cool on a table of rough-hewn wood each brown crust crackling as the baker draws his blade through them. Within the crust lies a heavy crumb speckled with bran and bits of grain from the millstone. Each slice fills the mouth with simple nourishment. A child at the table tears off a chunk, moistening it in the thinnest broth they have, drawing out any flavor it can find. There is no butter or cheese to spread, only the hearty warmth of the bread itself. This plain brown loaf is the daily gift that shapes their day. In a small cottage, a large black pot hangs over the hearth fire. Dark smoke curls up the chimney as water bubbles with handfuls of barley, dried peas, and chopped root vegetables, onions, carrots. Turnips dropped in to thicken the stew. With each stir of a wooden ladle, steam rises heavy with grain and earth. The broth thickens in the heat as the grains release their starch, and sometimes a bit of salt, pork, or leftover broth is added for richer taste. The kitchen is filled with this humble aroma, warm and steady, as if the pot itself is breathing life into the house. This simple pottage is the heart of every meal for the villagers. They dip their spoons with patience, for it will be offered at every break, morning, midday, and evening. By afternoon, the thin porridge from dawn has become a thicker stew as the grains have softened and absorbed the liquid. By night, more water might revive the pot for one last serving. One day the stew will taste more of barley and onion, the next day of peas and nettles, whatever the garden or woods have yielded. Each mouthful, no matter how plain, keeps their bodies steady. No fish or roast, just the thick stew of land and water. In that silence around the pot, they think only of the warmth in their bellies, thankful that this one shared dish gives life enough to work another day. Bread and pottage may be simple fare, but to these families it is everything. Even on fasting days, when meat is forbidden, the pot cooks on with just vegetables and herbs. There is a humble pride in keeping this pot alive, tending the fire, adding drips of water, and small bits of food to eke it out. Children hover at the hearth, waiting for their turn to dip a spoon. The stew is rarely lavish, but in each wooden bowl it is fellowship and small hope. It carries them through the day and into the night. In this world of careful frugality, meat is almost a memory. Rarely does a peasant family taste the richness of flesh. Perhaps in autumn a pig, raised from spring to winter, is slaughtered behind closed barn doors. The cook hangs strips of bacon to smoke and mixes the remaining blood with barley to make a black pudding, a dark, earthy sausage that feeds many mouths. After the butcher has gone, only bones remain. These are simmered in the stew to flavor it. On ordinary days, meat is absent from their bowls. A bit of pork fat, fried in the morning, may spread its smoky scent, but mostly they rely on grains and vegetables. If there is anything besides plants, it often comes from the water. A fisherman might sell salted herring or slabs of dried cod when the market is fresh. In the village, someone might drop a net in the river to catch a few trout and perch, or squat on the muddy banks to pull writhing eels. These fish are carefully cleaned, salted, and smoked until their flesh is tough but lasts through winter. On Fridays and special holy days, when the church forbids flesh, even this meagre bounty is welcome. Yet even fish was not easy. Rivers ran low in summer, and salt had to be bought from far shores at great expense, kept by the spoonful for flavor. Sometimes the villagers savor a bird, a goose before Christmas, or a plump chicken on a saint's day. Even an egg from a hen is cherished as a small treasure. But venison, lamb, or beef are dreams seen only in tales. The forests belong to the Lord, and no peasant dares hunt deer. Instead, they keep a humble herd, a goat for milk, and a handful of sheep for wool, and an occasional lamb to celebrate. Life without meat is simple and plain. The taste of roast or the drippings of grease have faded from memory, replaced by the sweet softness of freshly baked bread and the familiar stew on the fire. The castle kitchens bustle with activity as the lord's cooks prepare an opulent banquet. Roast venison, salted hams, and fat geese sizzle on spits hung over the fire. They pour spiced wine and steep rosemary into sauces of verjuice and honey. Exotic spices from distant lands, pepper, saffron, cinnamon, fill the air. Fine white loaves of bread are baked from the choicest wheat and adorned with poppy seeds and almonds. At the long table, gilded with silver and cut crystal, the noble family and their guests dress their plates with these rich foods. Jests and music accompany their feast, and the abundance is taken as a mark of honor and wealth. Outside the walls, in the same countryside, the scene is much simpler. Peasants sit by the hearth with coarse brown bread and a bowl of thin pottage. They drink small beer or water from wooden cups. A few scraps of pork or butter are distributed only on special occasions. There are no spiced loaves or honeyed cakes for them. They eat because they must, not to enjoy a celebration. In stone cloisters, abbots and monks break their fast with plain bread and thin ale, eating heartily to sustain their prayers. In their gardens, onions, kale, and a few fruit trees supply what luxuries they have. What they lack in spicing they make up with routine. Even so, the monk's table has no pepper or orange to savour. Outside the monastery, townsfolk find modest variety. A merchant's family may dine on goat cheese and radishes, or buy smoked trout from a tavern. A travelling knight, weary from his journeys, drains foamy ale from a wooden mug, and dreams of plum tarts and roasted fowl. But all these palates pale against that of the baron in his hall. The further one climbs the ladder of rank, the richer the recipes, and the grander the gatherings. When spring arrives, it brings no joy, only a quiet dread. The snow may melt, but the fields remain empty. All the grain harvested last year has been consumed, or almost so, and the new crops are still buried in furrowed ground. Kitchens echo with the scraping of barrels and the rustle of dried herbs. Each family subsists on its stores. Handfuls of barley for thick gruel, the last loaf tucked away for emergencies, and the root vegetables pulled late from the frozen soil. They dare not celebrate until they reap again. Each day is a bargain with patience and faith, as they pray for a generous return from the earth. They watch the summer sun while toiling in the fields. When the barley bends under the weight of new grain in late summer, relief flows through the village. Harvest becomes a quiet celebration. Long days of cutting sheaves, filling carts, and storing grain in the barns. The golden fields now hold the promise of life. But the chill of October brings anxiety back. Families set aside oats and barley for winter porridges and string salted pork to age by the hearth. They gather turnips and carrots from the hard ground, knowing winter will test their stores. All the while, they whisper prayers that the yield will last until they sow again. For these families, food must sometimes be conjured from unlikely places. If barley runs short, acorns are gathered and pounded into flour, a dark, bitter loaf that once boiled many times might pass as bread. Wild greens and herbs, once mere weeds, are harvested from roadside and forest. Dandelion leaves for a bitter bite, nettles for iron-rich broth, sheep sorrel for a tart lift. Snails and riverbank shells might find their way into the pot. Mothers steep acorn extract or wood sap to sweeten gruels. Even the hay in the barn, when ground fine and boiled, can serve as the thinnest of porridges. These are not choices, but necessities. They remind the families of each precious grain and every speck of salt. And nothing is wasted. When a soup has been eaten to its last drop, children might pick at the bones to suck out marrow, or pull apart scraps to pry out meat from the gristle. Stale bread is crumbled into ale to form warm porridge. Any leftover broth is frozen and scraped back into a new stew to eke out every flavour. Even the whey from cheese making might be sweetened with honey or vinegar. Such meals would be unrecognizable to wealthier palates, but for these people, each morsel, however humble, sustains them. It is a quiet reality of survival in a world where hunger is never far. Now, silence returns to the sleeping village under the same star-pierced sky. Only a low glow lingers in the hearth as one ember settles and dies. Each family lies near the warmth, their bellies full enough for rest. The smallest child nestles under straw blankets, dreamless with peace. Even the oldest elder nods by the hearth embers, sleep sealing the day's hardships. Outside, the wind has hushed, and the fields lie under the gentle gaze of the moon. No sound stirs the night but the quiet whisper of breeze. Under the watchful stars, the village dozes. In these hushed hours, the memory of their simple meals drifts away with the smoke. With no hunger in their bellies to awake them, they drift into sleep beneath the gentle night sky. At the gentle turn from night to day, dawn unfurls softly over a simple village. Misty air drifts over tilled fields and wooden rooftops, holding the cool promise of morning. Wisps of smoke rise lazily from stone chimneys, winding up to meet the pale pink sky. Along a curved dirt road, a single lamp glows dimly in the threshold of a cottage built of timber and plaster. Inside, a small cast-iron pot hangs over a glowing coal fire in the hearth. The quiet crackle of wood is the only sound, aside from a distant rooster giving a faint crow. A wooden table sits near the hearth, draped in a roughly woven cloth. On it, a hunk of coarse brown bread rests on a wooden board. A mother gently breathes on the warm loaf, hoping to soften its crust, while a father turns slowly from the fire, carrying a wooden cup of weak ale. The air smells of peat smoke, stale grain, and warm dough, carrying a faint hope. The glow of the fire dances across their hands and faces, slow and flickering. Outside, a tabby cat stretches on the threshold, and then slips silently into the silent dawn. In a corner by the door, a child stirs under a wool blanket as the first rays of sun brush the sky. Crickets grow quiet, and a light breeze drifts through the open door, cooling a glistening sweat on the mother's brow. Beyond the cottage, dark fields lie in silence. In the distance, the steady bleat of a sheep and the chirp of birds begin to fill the air. Morning dew glistens on spidery webs strung between hedges, each tiny droplet catching the first pale light. All things are still and safe, cradled in the early morning calm. The day ahead is uncertain, and yet for this moment, peace lies in the simple light. A distant church bell rings for the noon hour. It is a comforting sound, marking time calmly, even as hunger circles them. He smiles faintly at how such a simple sound can carry a sense of peace to all corners of the village. Before the sun rises fully, he is already awake. The village is quiet except for the low crackle of the hearth fire, and even the heavy air holds a calm hush. He stokes the embers, adding scraps of dry bark and kindling wood. The small flames leap, and gentle warmth spreads to the corners of the room. This day begins with the simplest of meals. She has set water to boil in a small cauldron over the coals. He pours himself a shallow bowl and adds a handful of the coarsely ground grain left from yesterday's baking. Wheat flour is too precious for this. Instead, he uses rye and oats for this thin porridge. It bubbles and thickens, filling the room with the smell of warm grain and earth. There is no milk to pour in, not in winter at least, and so the gruel will be watery and bland. He tears pieces from the heavy loaf they baked days ago and drops them into the pot, where they soften and swell. When the light in the window turns pale blue, their meagre breakfast is ready. He ladles the brown porridge into wooden bowls, steam rising gently. It smells of hearth and barley. The family sits down to eat herself, and their children gathered with him. The children rub sleep from their eyes, and the mother ties a scarf around the youngest's shoulders. They eat in silence, the quiet scraping of spoons the only sound, then bite into bread dipped into the porridge. Each swallow is a blessing. The porridge, plain and warm, is barely enough to fill an empty belly until the main meal. He wipes his mouth with the back of his hand and stands to start the day's chores. The hut is bare except for necessities, stools, a simple loom in the corner, a chest of cloth scraps, and yet after that simple meal he feels neither want nor hunger. Even the back of the chair where he sat holds the faint warmth of morning and the memory of grain. For this family, food is not a choice, it is survival. By midday, when the sun has climbed high, the family gathers again for the main meal. After tending the small flock and checking the garden patch, he returns to the cottage. Through the open door, the scent of rain on green leaves drifts in from outside. Inside, a heavy iron pot has been simmering gently over the steady fire since dawn. In it is the pottage, the endless stew that keeps them alive. He takes his seat on a rough wooden stool by the hearth, and one by one the children settle beside him. The eldest child sits to his left, the youngest to his right. With practiced hands, he ladles the soup into a well-worn wooden bowl and passes it to the eldest, then to himself. The pottage is thick and earthy brown. Bursting barley grains float to the surface, and small, tender pieces of vegetables mingle in the broth. Cabbage leaves and onion stems, perhaps a sliver of parsnip or carrot, all boiled until soft. A little salt and a handful of dried herbs from the garden add what flavor they can. Long ago, a scrap of smoked fish or salted fat was thrown in to enrich the broth, but now their main taste is the grain itself, hearty and almost sweet. He hands a second bowl of the same soup to the youngest child, and the mother holds a bowl as well. They eat slowly, with no rush. The room is quiet, except for the soft slurping of the stew. He notices his children duck their heads and close their eyes, a moment when they taste the salty broth. Each small gesture tells him they are not taking a single bite for granted. When everyone has had their fill and the bowls are half empty, he pushes the largest chunk of bread across the table. The loaf is heavy and dark. He breaks it into as many rough pieces as possible, tearing edges so none is wasted. He dips a strip of the bread back into the thin soup, letting the last drops soak it through. The bread tastes of charred crust and barley dust. Softened in the broth, it turns into something rich that he chews happily. They finish in silence, grateful, with crumbs of soaked bread left on their plates. Outside, the tall grasses sway in the summer breeze, and the sun looks down kindly on this small family. The midday meal was spare, but it was a blessing that kept hunger at bay for a few more hours. He can feel his belly pressing against his simple linen shirt, a solid reminder of what even a thin meal can do. He glances at his wife and children and offers a gentle nod, a silent thanks to the land that gave them food. He realizes how extraordinary this quiet scene is. Nothing fancy, nothing chosen beyond what nature provides. Yet each small gift, each spoonful of soup and bite of bread is the difference between hunger and life. This brown bread is their daily companion. It is thick and heavy, close to the color of rich earth. He remembers tasting fine wheaten bread once, as a boy passing through the city, soft and sweet, golden crust crackling. But wheat is a distant dream. Here in their simple village, only lords and merchants enjoy golden loaves. For them, a loaf is made of rye and barley meal, ground coarsely at the mill, bran and all. It has no softness, no sweetness. It is strong and honest. She places the loaf on the table, and he brings out a long wooden knife to slice it. Each cut is made with care. She takes her turn, then hands pieces around. The children clutch their slices, tearing off bites. He takes his piece and presses it between his fingers. The grainy, rustic smell rises. He remembers old years, when bread was even coarser years, when acorns or dried beans were mixed in to stretch the flour. One winter, long ago, when even that was scarce, they ground up dried peas and onion skins into flour to make what they called horse bread. The memory of that hard, bitter cake of dough makes this loaf seem like a feast. But now he tastes it without complaint. He feels the firm chew and barely tastes a hint of rye sourness because he is so grateful to have it. This plain bread fills them, sustains them. As the firelight dances on the kitchen wall, she squeezes a small drop of honey from a jar onto her slice, allowing herself a tiny sweetness. It is a luxury they rarely indulge. He doesn't ask for any. He likes it as it is, warm and familiar. This crust of bread, he knows, is more precious than any spice or sweet. It has fed generations before them, and today it fills their bellies as well. Each child eats slowly, spreading what they have over their lips. They do not rush, for they understand without words that none of this can be wasted. It is life itself. After the meal, the day's work begins in earnest. He lifts the empty bowls and places them by the hearth to cool. The cat, having sat quietly at his feet, yawns and stands to stretch. Outside, the morning sunlight pours through the doorway, drawing shapes on the floor. He steps out with a deep breath of fresh air. The world is bright green and warm now. He carries the milking bucket and the chipped wooden yardstick used for measuring grain into the yard, where a few sheep and goats stretch and bleat. First he checks the animals, names each woolly neck and rough tongue, giving each a handful of hay. A handful of oats is a treat for them. Even the animals understand the quiet reverence of this hour. They know food, like everything else, comes from labor and luck. Next he moves to the fields beyond the barn. Rows of barley and oats already stand shoulder high, and soon they will bow under golden heads. He crouches to inspect the green shoots, pulling a stray weed here, encouraging a weak stalk there. Between his fingers, the soil feels rich and cool. He whispers to it, asking it to do its best. Above him, a hawk circles once in the sky, and then drifts away. Birds chirp along the hedges. A gentle breeze carries the earthy scent of new grass, and the sweet perfume of blackberries hanging in clusters. He pauses, and allows himself a moment to listen to the creak of a cart on a distant road, to the call of a field worker greeting the day. It is all so ordinary, the neighbours working their own fields, the low murmur of water in the well, the church bell ringing over the village. Yet in its quietness there is comfort. Every morning he comes to this work and gives thanks. For as the sweat on his brow dries, the promise of tomorrow's bread lies ahead. In spring they planted these grains. Summer has nurtured them. In autumn they will reap the reward. His simple life moves in this steady cycle of soil and seasons. He pulls a ripe pea pod from a vine in the garden and pops it into his mouth. It is crisp, a hint of salt from the earth. For him, this little green crunch is more luxurious than any feast in a far-off hall. He swallows and smiles, grateful that such small gifts exist. Everywhere around him, life goes on at this humble pace. Children run in the dirt, chasing shadows and clucking at timid chickens. A young girl from the next farm wraps loaves of bread in cloth to sell at the market in town later. The smell drifts faintly on the breeze. An old farmer leans on his spade and waves, nodding as if they understand each other's quiet struggles. Far ahead, smoke curls from the bakehouse chimney, that scent of fresh bread he has smelled before but rarely tasted himself. He stares at the smoke for a moment, then turns back to his own chores. They live off the land, what it gives, and nothing more. They plant what they can, tend it daily, and pray that the sky will fill their granaries. When day's end comes, and the harvest is done, they save a little seed and a little flour, so that even when winter snows fall, bread will still be made from last autumn's grain. He is aware that each harvest will require him to give part of it away to half to the Lord of the manor, or as tithe to the church. But he doesn't dwell on that now. Today he trusts that what they have will be enough until the new harvest. He resumes the plough, the wooden beam firmly in his hands. His donkey follows along, steady and patient. Together they walk the field, each furrow a step toward another day of bread. The sun climbs higher, and he hears the midday bell ring again. Soon he will sit down once more to eat, but for now the earth nourishes him with its openness and its promise. When evening comes at last, tired arms return to the hearth. The fire is stoked again with wood gathered from the yard. He warms the last of the soup and sets it out on the table. The family gathers a final time, as they will every night. The sky outside darkens to deep blue and then black, stars blinking gently above. The children sip the lukewarm broth, dipping their last pieces of bread into the pot. Tonight there might be a scrap of cheese to crumble in, or a spoonful of honey for flavor if they saved it. He tastes the spoonful and closes his eyes at the richness such tiny comforts are treasures to them. After eating, she wraps each child in woolen blankets and tucks them into the straw on the floor near the hearth. He sits back in his chair, warm and full. In the quiet, he hums an old lullaby under his breath. Outside, the crickets sing and the owl cries once. He takes comfort in the routine. Each nightfall is welcome because it means another small feast, another day survived. Every breath he takes is free of hunger and fear. Around him, the cottage is cradled in gentle darkness, the firelight flickering on the rough wood walls. Stars drift softly overhead through the open window. He whispers one last thanks to the night, to the hearth, to the simple gifts of bread and broth. Then he closes his eyes, content and safe, ready to dream of the dawn. And for this simple family, that is enough. Food was not a choice, he knows. It was survival itself, and having it, even when it is humble and plain, is its own kind of blessing. In a small cottage at the edge of a village, the first light of morning filters through a low window and falls on a heavy iron pot simmering over embers. The cook stands quietly by the hearth, a large wooden spoon in hand, gently stirring the thick stew that will sustain the family through the day. Outside, a chill mist drifts over frost-covered ground as dawn breaks, and the warmth of the stove begins to push back the early cold. The scent of simmering meat and fresh vegetables curls upward and mingles with the soft smoke of the fire. Every so often, the spoon scrapes lightly against the pot's blackened bottom with a gentle clink, an ordinary sound in this quiet kitchen. The day's work is just beginning, and already the ritual of the pot holds the family together. Each day the pottage pot is low and replenished again, a perpetual broth rich with memory and purpose. Leftover bits from the previous day linger by the hearth. A small handful of barley, a few wilted carrots, a scrap of salted pork. In the quiet morning stillness, the cook adds these remnants into the bubbling mixture, which has soured and grown more intense overnight. A tumble of water or a splash of weak ale follows to loosen the potion and raise it anew. Perhaps stale breadcrumbs or a handful of wild herbs go in after that. The aim being simple and constant. Use what's at hand, waste nothing, and keep the pot alive through each season's gift and every hunger's call. The pot itself is heavy and black, its rim worn smooth by decades of stirring hands. Even on mornings when there is little more than water, barley, and a scrap of onion, it sputters and calls, offering a simple meal for lean times. On more generous days, when the thin smoke from the chimney hints of bacon frying or venison roasting outside, the stew grows richer. A handful of beans or marrow bones might thud into the pot now, and perhaps a bouquet of rosemary and thyme, tied with string at the hearth's side, is dropped in, murmuring its herbal breath into the brew. The base remains the same: water, grain, and roots, comfort and sustenance in any season. Each gentle stir releases a new note. The aroma deepens, a mingling of yesterday's bread and smoky ash. The family awakens quietly. A small child inches out from under a woolen blanket, yawning sleepily as his bare feet shuffle on the cold stone floor. He looks down at the kettle crackling on the fire, eyes curious at the steam rising in lazy tendrils toward the rafters. His mother hums a low lullaby as she drops a handful of oats into the pot, the grains making dull thuds against iron before disappearing into the bubbling depths. The sound blends with the crackle of logs and the gentle murmur of boiling, like a soothing chorus of its own. It is a simple morning song, a steady heartbeat around which the family's day begins. Beyond the little cottage walls, the passing seasons bring subtle shifts in color and flavor. In spring, the stew is fresh and bright. Tiny shoots of wild garlic and young herbs gather in from the fields. Tender leeks just poking through the earth, heads of parsley newly unfurled, slender roots of parsnip that survived the winter. Each spoonful tastes of new beginnings. The gentle sweetness of young peas, or the crisp breath of an early carrot. As summer marches on under the blossoming trees, the pottage thickens with abundance. The heat outside draws sweat from the brow of the cook who tends it, but inside the kitchen air is warm and heavy with the earthy fragrance of ripening squash and soft beans. A tall ceramic jug of water hisses as it is poured into the pot, diluting the rich brew just enough. The cook chops handfuls of ripe greens, flat parsley, mint tinted with sun, thick rings of onion, dropping them into the mix with a practiced flick of the wrist. By evening, as a glow of golden light filters through the smoke, bright flecks of carrot and green leaves bob in the broth, ready to be ladled into wooden bowls. When harvest ripens and autumn paints the fields brown and gold, a different meal takes over the pot. Early dawn brings a pale wind, and frost may linger on the edges of the thatch. Now the kitchen seems cozier. Heaped baskets of tubers, like turnips and parsnips, are peeled and roughly crushed on the wooden table. The cook dips her fingers into cold water and crumbles dried herbs, marjoram dark and oregano deep brown, along with a pinch of cracked peppercorns. Thick cut slabs of winter squash are added next, sinking with a soft thud into the boiling depths. The pot's surface ripples, turning a rich amber as pumpkin color leaks into the broth. There is something deeply comforting in the smoky sweetness of these root vegetables and the warm bite of pepper that now seeps into every ladleful. In winter's quiet hours, the stew becomes sacred warmth against the cold. Outside, the wind whistles around the eaves, and snowdrifts cradle the world in stillness. Inside, a small knot of family gather close to the hearth. The pot has simmered nearly night and day. In its dark belly churn thin slices of onion, softened to jelly, and pinches of salt that melt like morning light in the darkness. With a frost-nipped hand, the cook adds a few more dried peas and a spoonful of the rendered fat from last week's salted bacon. The mixture sighs and bubbles, as if to share the memory of autumn's bounty one more time. Even beyond this humble cottage, the steady pot is everywhere at home. In the grand stone kitchens of a lord's manor, a giant cauldron hangs blackened by countless fires. Lines of servants shuffle by with baskets of ingredients, and staff of cooks stand at its edge like sentries. The great pot steams thickly, and its rich scent drifts down long corridors to call the servants to eat. Here the ingredients include luxuries. Strands of saffron bloom in the golden broth. Pounded spices from far-off markets lend warmth, and tender venison pieces sink into the depths of the cauldron, enriched by marrow bones and even fruit from the orchard. Yet even here, Where privilege abounds, the result is much the same as in the cottage. A dark, nourishing pottage that steadies bodies and souls alike. Back in humble surroundings, the rhythm of the pot never changes. Each sunrise brings the same ritual. Embers drawn out into flame, chunks of firewood split with an axe, a drizzle of fat or oil sizzling gently in the pot. Even the cracks and marks on the worn wooden spoon tell stories of meals past, faithfully guiding each stir. The ingredients may vary: garden herbs in spring, summer greens, autumn roots, and winter stores, but always the quiet comfort and constancy of that warm bowl remains. The hearth keeps time with the slow, soft boiling. It sings a low melody of sustenance as each day unfolds, its steady song one of the stew that quietly holds it all together. Each family, noble or peasant, near or far, knows this. When hunger comes crawling at dusk after a day of toil, the pot is the hearth's true guardian. The cauldron hushes, its magic transforming stale bread into broth, dried meats into tender morsels, and biting cold into gentle warmth. No matter what tomorrow's light may bring, the evening meal, drawn from the pot, is a reminder of survival, of togetherness. And even as eyelids grow heavy and blankets warm shoulders in sleep, the hearth's last crackle and the lingering aroma of pottage promise that the pot will be ready again with dawn. In a humble village kitchen, a clay pot simmers quietly over a low fire. Inside is a thin pottage of peas, beans, and wild greens, a daily fare that carries only the faintest memory of meat. Day after day, the peasant family's meals taste of earth and field, with bread and broth to fill their stomachs. The rich, savoury flavour of meat is a rare visitor here. When a scrap of meat does grace the pot, it is an occasion of almost reverent significance. The children watch wide-eyed as a single piece of salted pork fat or a bony remnant from a distant feast melts its essence into the stew. Such moments are treasured. For ordinary folk, flesh is a delicacy tasted only a few times a year. Most nights, they make do with what their own gardens and hen coops provide, and the hearty pottage, devoid of meat, must satisfy their hunger as well as their longing. The absence of meat is simply the way of things, a fact of life accepted with a sigh, and a remembering of better days when a bit of bacon last graced the table. They live in a world where animals are far more valuable alive than on the plate. A cow gives milk and labours in the field. Chickens lay eggs. Even the lowly family pig, kept at the edge of the yard, grows fat on acorns in the autumn woods. To slaughter such an animal for a single meal is a serious decision. Many peasants keep a pig or two if they can, but will not often afford to kill one. Instead, they might nurture the creature through the summer, fattening it for the cold months ahead. Only when the weather turns and the winter frosts arrive will the family consider the butchering, for then the chill air will help keep the meat from rotting too quickly. Thus, a pig might be slaughtered at Martinmas, Street Martin's Day in November, when tradition and necessity converge. At that time, as the early snowflakes drift in the grey sky, the family joins neighbours in the yearly ritual of slaughter known to all. Geese and pigs are brought in and butchered at Martinmas time, their meat carefully salted to last the winter. The fresh pork is divided, some to be cooked immediately for a rare celebratory feast, but most to be preserved for the lean months. They speak of Martinmas beef and Martinmas bacon, names for the salted meat stores that will sustain them until spring. In the farmhouse yard, one can hear the sounds of knives and the crackling of a fire, but it is not a scene of excess or cruelty. It is measured and mindful. Every part of the animal will serve a purpose, for nothing so precious can go to waste. The air is cold and still, carrying the iron scent of blood briefly before it is washed away, and then the dominant odor becomes the sharp, penetrating tang of salt and curing flesh, a promise that in the dark of winter there will be sustenance. When meat comes into a poor household, preservation is the foremost concern. Without knowledge of refrigeration, without even an ice house in most cases, they must rely on ancient, time-tested methods to guard against decay. In the dim light of their cottage, they pack cuts of pork into barrels of coarse salt, a process known as dry salting, in which the salt crystals draw out the meat's moisture and stave off the bacteria of rot. Other pieces are submerged in brine, pickling even joints of beef or pork in salt water, spiced with a little sage or pepper if available. In a corner stands a large earthenware jar of rendered fat. Some strips of cooked meat might be sealed beneath a layer of this cool, congealed lard, creating an airtight tomb where no spoilage can reach. Near the hearth, strings of sausages and lengths of meat hang from the rafters, curing in the warm, smoky air. All through the day and into the evening, green wood smoulders slowly on the fire, its smoke curling upward to caress the hanging meats. This smoking process imbues the flesh with a woody perfume and a dark outer crust, protecting it from insects and bacteria. By the time it is done, the meat is dried and dark, safe to eat for many weeks or months. By the late Middle Ages, treating meat with salt and smoke was common practice in every village, even without a modern understanding of microbes. People knew by hard experience that these methods could keep their food edible far beyond its natural span. A side of bacon, once fresh and pink, emerges from the smokehouse tawny brown and stiff. A hind leg of pork becomes a ham, dense with salt, to be sliced sparingly as needed. The kitchen fills with the heavy scent of cured meat, a smell both reassuring and intense. It promises nourishment, but also reminds all of the care that must be taken. For now the real challenge begins. The meat must be kept dry and safe from vermin, and watched for any sign of spoilage as the weeks turn into months. In these rural homes, the preservation of meat is nearly a sacred task, performed with a mix of hope and anxiety. Salt is precious, often bought with hard-saved coins or rendered as part of rent to the Lord, so every grain used to save food is considered well spent. They rub it in generously, seeing how the flesh firms under their hands as moisture departs. Yet they know salt alone is not always enough. Inferior salt, or a poorly packed barrel, can allow decay to creep in. If the summer's humidity finds its way into the storage shed or the cellar where meats hang, even a well-cured ham can spoil. A bit of mold on a smoked sausage or a whiff of sourness from a bacon slab is enough to send the housewife into a flurry of concern. She will trim away any suspect parts, wipe the meat with vinegar or wine if she has it, and rehang it in a drier spot, praying that the rot goes no further. Their senses are attuned to danger. The moment a strange smell or slimy film is noticed on a piece of meat, alarms ring in their minds. In a world without scientific terms, they speak of food being wholesome or corrupted. Wholesome meat has a clean, rich scent of salt and fat. Corrupted meat betrays itself with a sweetly sickening odor or a greenish tinge. Folk wisdom holds that one must be especially vigilant in the damp warmth of late spring, when the last of the winter stores might turn bad. Many say that meat can sicken just like a person, and that flesh which has started to decay will carry illness to whoever eats it. Indeed, medieval medical writers warn that meat from animals that were old or ill, or cuts that have begun to spoil, could upset the balance of the body and bring on fevers, or worse. They may not know of bacteria, but they understand that rotten meat is dangerous, and they fear it deeply. As a result, the common people take great care in preparing what little meat they have. When a salted piece of pork is finally retrieved from its barrel weeks later, encrusted in hardened salt, it is soaked and boiled thoroughly, sometimes with aromatic herbs, to ensure it will not harm the family. Meat that has hung dried for months is cooked slowly in stews until tender, the boiling broth hoped to kill any hidden menace. In some villages, a prudent cook keeps a pot of stew gently bubbling day after day, a perpetual pottage into which each day's scraps of meat and vegetables are added and reboiled. This continuous cooking prevents the stew from ever truly spoiling. By the heat of each new day's fire, yesterday's meat is purified again and again. Such a dish might grow quite concentrated and strong by week's end, but in an age without easy plenty, nothing edible is ever discarded lightly. If a bit of meat has been kept a little too long, rather than waste it, they will doctor it with spices and wine and long boiling. A clever cook might add onions, garlic, or peppery herbs to mask a slight taint, stewing the meat for hours until its flavor blends into the sauce. In truth, this is done only for meat that is questionable, but not yet truly rotten. For no one knowingly eats meat that has gone completely bad, not if they can help it. The risks are too grave, and stories abound of those who died after consuming foul provisions. So the careful householder sniffs every pot and inspects every chunk of bacon. If it is too far gone, even the hungriest family will throw it to the dogs or bury it in the ground rather than invite poison to their table. Better a meal of bread and broth in safety than a feast that might bring sickness or death. For the peasantry, then, meat is a rarity and a luxury, approached with a mix of eagerness and caution. It is eaten in small portions, often stretched out in soups or with grains to make it last. A single joint of salted beef might be the cornerstone of meals for a week. Each day a little is shaved off and added to the pot to lend its flavor. The bones, once all the meat has been boiled off, will be cracked for the marrow, or added yet again to the kettle to enrich a thin gruel. They know how to extract every drop of nourishment from an animal. Nothing is wasted, from the liver and heart that might be made into a pudding, to the feet and ears that can boil into a gelatinous jelly. Even the blood spilled on slaughter day is caught in a basin and mixed with oats and spices to cook into black pudding sausages, a delicacy for that evening's meal while the rest is stored away. Afterwards, the family will not taste fresh meat again for a long while. They will subsist on their salted and smoked stores sparingly, and on many days there will be no meat at all on the table. Weeks, even months, might pass in strict abstinence from flesh, especially during Lent or fast days when church law forbids it. But even outside those times, scarcity enforces its own abstinence on the poor. For many peasant families, meat appears only on special occasions, festivals, holy days, or celebrations like a wedding or the harvest home. On those days, a village might come together to roast a pig or an ewe, filling the air with a mouth-watering aroma that drifts over fields and down lanes, drawing smiles from even the weariest labourer. At Christmas or Easter, if the household has been fortunate, there might be a little beef or a fine capon to roast, obtained at the market at dear cost. Such feasts are modest by any grand measure, but to those who partake, they are moments of true bounty. Picture a simple wooden table in a thatched cottage, laid out with its best cloth. In the centre, a steaming stew pot, or a small roast of pork upon a trencher of bread. The family gathers, heads bowed in thanks, before savouring each bite slowly, knowing it may be long before they have such richness again. Even a small portion of meat, shared among many, can lift their spirits, the warmth of it spreading through their bodies in the cold of winter, the taste a reminder that life, though hard, still has its gifts. While the common folk count their morsels of meat as treasures, the nobility live in another world entirely when it comes to food. In the draughty halls of a castle or manor, the kitchen fires burn hot and bright every day, and meat is not a rarity but a daily staple and showpiece. The kinds of meat available to different classes could not be more starkly contrasted. The wealthy lord and lady have access to an array of meats that a peasant might never encounter in a lifetime. With vast estates and hunting grounds, the nobles dine on venison from deer they hunt in their forests, on wild boar, and on game birds like pheasant, swan, or even peacock. In their pastures graze fattened cattle and sheep ready for slaughter, and their fish ponds and rivers provide fresh pike and trout at a whim. Unlike the peasant, who must consider a chicken's value for eggs before its meat, the lord can order a hen or goose killed simply to enjoy its flesh at supper. In the noble kitchen, one might find whole sides of beef, haunches of venison, or racks of mutton being roasted on spits by scullions, while other servants prepare delicate rabbits and game birds into pies. The diet of the upper classes is heavy with meat, beef and pork, mutton and goat, alongside the more exotic game, and they consume it in quantities that astonish outsiders. At a great feast, tables are laden with multiple courses of flesh. A lord might begin with slices of ham or a rich sausage, then move to a stew of beef and wine, followed by roasted fowl, and then a grand centerpiece of venison, or a whole pig presented with an apple in its mouth. The variety is a point of pride and status. To eat meat daily, and in such diversity, is a privilege of wealth, one that medieval culture strongly associates with power and nobility. Refined nobles dine on fresh game, seasoned with costly spices, accompanied by fine breads and wines, while peasants make do with coarse barley bread, beans, and perhaps a bit of salt pork. The difference is not only in quantity, but in kind. Where the peasant eats salted herring and pork scraps, the lord savours tender venison, flavoured with pepper and cloves, or a roast capon stuffed with figs and almond cream. In the castle's great hall, the atmosphere during a feast is thick with sumptuous smells and a sense of occasion. Imagine entering such a hall on a feast day. The long tables covered in white linen, the blaze of many candles and torches flickering off polished silver and golden goblets. Platters are being brought forth, bearing marvels of medieval cooking. At the high table, a steaming platter of venison is unveiled, the meat dark and gleaming from a spiced marinade. The lord of the manor, seated in a heavy oaken chair, nods in approval as a carver expertly slices the venison and serves it onto trenchers of bread. Nearby, a roasted boar is carried in by two servants, its skin crisped and brown, adorned with herbs and small fruits in its mouth. A triumph of the hunt displayed for all to see. The boar's rich scent, mingled with rosemary and garlic, wafts through the hall. Further down the table, guests marvel at a pair of roasted swans reassembled and decorated so that their white feathers bristle imposingly, as if they were alive on the platter. Such showpieces are called subtleties or entremets, edible artworks meant to delight the eye. A peacock roasted and then reclothed in its iridescent plumage, or a meat pie from which live doves flutter out when cut. These spectacles are not everyday fare, but at celebratory banquets the medieval nobility indulge in them to broadcast their wealth and imagination. The guests applaud softly at the presentation, before the dishes are carved and the tender meats within are shared. There is beef, too, and mutton, hearty cuts boiled with spices and served in peppery sauces, and delicate pigeons baked in flaky crusts. The variety of meats is astonishing. One chronicler might describe a noble feast, offering 25 courses, both flesh and fish, roasted and boiled, with each course featuring several kinds of animal. On ordinary days, the noble household might not feast so extravagantly, but even then, meat is central to their diet. A wealthy household's daily dinner often includes multiple meats, perhaps a stew of mutton or beef to start, then fowl for the second course, and ham or game in a third. Contemporary records from great houses show consumption that would stagger a peasant. Multiple pounds of meat per person per day, hundreds of cattle, sheep, and pigs slaughtered each year to supply a noble family and its retinue. Such is the nobility's access to protein that, in some times and places, even the average city dweller or soldier ate more meat in a day than modern people do. To the poor ploughman tilling the fields, the Lord's diet would seem unimaginably rich and wasteful. Yet even in these halls of abundance, the spectre of spoilage and caution is not entirely absent. The lords and ladies enjoy meat aplenty, but they too must respect the limits of the medieval kitchen. In summer, even a wealthy household cannot escape the reality that fresh meat will not keep long. They employ larders, cool pantries of stone, and sometimes even ice houses filled with winter's ice to preserve meats a little longer. Servants are tasked with inspecting the meats for any scent of decay. In great towns and cities, laws are on the books to protect the elite and common consumer alike. Butchers are forbidden to sell corrupt meat, and fines are levied when spoiled beef or pork is found on the market stalls. Of course, violations occur, carcasses sold after their prime, offal discarded too near the street, and food poisoning can strike rich and poor households alike when negligence or the heat of the day outpaces caution. The nobility, for all their wealth, are not immune to these dangers. There are tales of lords and even kings made gravely ill by foul meat or fish served at banquets. King Henry I of England, legend says, loved lamprey eel so much he overindulged and died from it. Whether from the lampreys themselves or their preparation, the story underscored that even luxury could be lethal. So in the castles, the cooks take care. They marinate meats in vinegar and spices. They cook everything thoroughly, and when something seems off, it is quietly removed to the kitchens and tossed away. The difference, of course, is that a wealthy household can afford such waste. They would rather throw out half a venison haunch than risk the Lord's health. In contrast, a poor family might be tempted to trim a bad bit and hope for the best, having no alternative for dinner. This fundamental divide between the meat-laden tables of the nobility and the meagre pottage of the peasantry defines much of the medieval experience of food. Food is not merely nourishment, it is status, it is fortune, it is fate. Consider a quiet night in the countryside. Above, a bright moon casts silver on the fields. In a peasant's cottage, the family settles to sleep with stomachs full of coarse bread and cabbage soup. Perhaps tonight there had been a special treat, a few slices of that precious smoked bacon fried and crumbled into their soup, giving it a richness that made everyone sigh with contentment. The father had saved those slices for a night when spirits were low, and winter's chill cut too deeply, a small celebration to remind them of warmer days. As they bank the fire and curl up on straw-filled mattresses, the savoury memory of that bacon lingers on their tongues. Across the valley, on a hill, the manor house is still awake with light and laughter. The Lord is hosting guests, and the sounds of a feast carry faintly through the cold air. A minstrel's tune, a burst of laughter, the clink of cups. In that great house they have dined on roasted meats and sweet puddings and drink-spiced wine by the hearth. Their bellies are full to excess, and the leftovers from the banquet could feed the village for a week. Indeed, once the lords and ladies have withdrawn, the servants will partake of the remains in the kitchen, and whatever is still abundant might even be given out as alms at the gate the next morning. It is not unheard of for charitable nobles to send a carcass of beef or a cask of salted fish down to the villagers after a feast, especially on feast days or in times of famine. Such gestures, though kindly, do not erase the fundamental truth that the diets of rich and poor are worlds apart. To a peasant, meat is life at its most flavorful, but also life measured out in careful portions, each bite appreciated. To a noble, meat is a daily comfort and a symbol of power, taken almost for granted except when used to impress. And so, the role of meat in medieval Europe is one of stark contrast and deep cultural meaning. In the quiet of the night, one can almost sense the dreams of the farmhand in his bed. Perhaps he dreams of a lavish table where meat is plentiful, or of a hunt where he can freely take a deer for his family without fear. Meanwhile, the well-fed lord may dream not of food, for that is ever at hand, but of glory in battle or sport, his appetites of another sort. Meat has nourished both, yet so unequally. When dawn comes, the cycle begins anew. The peasant will rise and break his fast with crusts of bread and ale, the taste of bacon only a memory, while the lord might wake to a hearty breakfast of meat pies or leftover game, each will go about their day, bound by the social order that decides who may eat what and when. But perhaps by the week's end, the peasant's family will share a hen from their coop, slaughtered on Sunday, stewed with garden herbs, and for a brief moment, as the tender chicken falls apart in their mouths, they, too, will know the simple joy that meat can bring. They will savour it slowly in the dim light of their cottage, a pause in the hardship, a taste of something rich and beyond the everyday. In that gentle moment, the gap between them and the nobles seems to close just a little, as all people, high or low, close their eyes in quiet delight when tasting a good piece of meat. The glow of contentment warms them, and in the calm silence after supper, there is a shared understanding throughout medieval Europe's kitchens and halls. Meat is precious, a gift to be cherished. However often or seldom it graces one's bowl. In a dim straw-thatched cottage, a peasant rises at dawn to a familiar hunger. He breaks his fast with a crust of coarse rye bread and a draught of thin ale. The bread is dark and chewy, baked from the rye and barley he grew himself, and the ale is mild and sour, safer than water. In the corner, a black iron pot has simmered since daybreak. By midday, when the sun is high and muscles ache from field work, he ladles out his one hearty meal, a thick pottage of boiled beans, peas, and onions plucked from his garden. Steam drifts upward as he eats slowly with a wooden spoon, savouring each warm mouthful of the simple stew. There is a hint of wild garlic and parsley in the broth, but little else to season it. Expensive spices never reach his table, so he relies on humble herbs for flavour. Occasionally a sliver of salted bacon or a marrow bone finds its way into the pot, but meat is a rarity reserved for the luckier days of the year. Day after day, the taste of earthy legumes and barley fills his belly, a monotonous comfort that keeps him strong enough to till the soil. As dusk falls, the peasant's supper is meagre, perhaps a heel of yesterday's bread with a bit of sharp cheese or thin slice of smoked ham if any remains. In the one-room hut, shadows dance on mud-brick walls as the family gathers by the hearth. They chew quietly, wearied by labour. The meal is repetitive, yet there is solace in its routine. Every bite is cherished, for each is hard-earned. Even in times of scarcity, when the pantry runs low, the peasant thanks fortune if at least the pottage pot can be kept on the fire. The humble fare, plain and filling, binds the family to the rhythms of the land, a daily ritual of sustenance in a world of uncertainty. Its very simplicity, a small comfort against the hunger beyond the door. Within the austere stone refectory of a monastery, a lone candle's flame wavers over long wooden tables as the monks take their places. Clad in coarse robes, they sit in perfect silence, eyes lowered, hands folded, until a bell rings to commence the midday meal. Bowls of steaming broth await them, a simple soup of lentils, greens, and leeks from the monastery gardens. Each monk also has a hunk of yesterday's bread and a cup of watered wine set before him. They eat slowly and deliberately, mindful of the rule that guides their days. No words are spoken, only the soft sounds of sipping and an occasional shuffle break the hush, underscored by the distant echo of a scripture being read aloud. The meal is modest but nourishing, 2 plain dishes, perhaps a ladle of bean stew alongside boiled root vegetables, and if the season allows, a few fresh apples or herbs added as a small grace. Meat never graces their table, for flesh is forbidden to them except in the infirmary for the gravely ill. Instead, their protein comes from peas and cheese, or salted fish on holy days. The bread is brown and dense, baked from the same grains as the peasant's loaf, though on feast days it might be fine white to honor the occasion. By tradition, each monk's portion is measured, about a pound of bread and a half measure of the monastery's own wine for the day. They take these allowances with humility, eating not for pleasure but to fuel prayer and work. As sunlight slants through the cloister windows, the monks finish their midday repast with a short prayer of thanks. On Wednesdays and Fridays in summer, even this simple meal is skipped, a fast observed in devotion, when they will go from dawn to dusk with nothing but water and faith to sustain them. Yet no complaint is ever uttered. Here, mealtime is a sacred regimen, as predictable as the chanting of psalms at midnight and dawn. In the evening, a second, lighter supper will be taken, perhaps a bowl of porridge or a bit of bread and cheese, but always in the same quiet order. In this way, the monastery's rhythm is upheld day after day. The food is plain, the portions moderate, but it nourishes body and spirit alike in its very orderliness. Within these hallowed walls, eating is an act of discipline and grace, the simplicity of the fare a reflection of their vows. The monk's world is one where each taste is a reminder of humility, every meal a carefully measured step on the path of devotion. Under an open sky on a war-torn road, a weary soldier crouches by a small campfire, its embers casting flickers of orange on his weathered face. Around him, a few comrades huddle in threadbare cloaks, the night air smelling of wood smoke and sweat. In a dented iron pot propped over the flames, something simmers, a thin stew that passes for supper. The soldier stirs it with the tip of his dagger. Within the broth floats hard-tack biscuits broken into pieces, a handful of dried peas, and shreds of salt pork releasing their grease into the water. He remembers how the constant diet of dried bread can distress a man's stomach, so he softens the hard crusts in the communal pot, letting them soak up the fatty broth. The aroma is humble but heartening, salted meat and onion mingled with wood smoke, and it draws a few hungry gazes from the others. With no table nor bowl, he will eat straight from the pot, or ladle the stew into a battered tin cup. By the soldier's side lies a leather pouch, holding his rations, a chunk of yesterday's brown bread, and a strip of smoked meat for tomorrow's march, as tough and briny as old hide. If fortune has smiled, there might be a morsel of cheese or a clove of garlic tucked away to lend a hint of flavor. On rare days of plenty, he's seen rations so generous that each man received nearly a kilogram of bread and a hearty slab of salted beef, more than even a poor farmer might eat in days. But tonight's portion is meager. The soldier raises a skin of sour wine to his lips, washing down the meal with a few rough gulps. The wine is cheap and vinegared, but it warms his throat. Others drink weak beer from dented flasks, the ale flat but safer than unboiled water. There are nights after a victorious skirmish or a well-timed supply convoy when this camp has feasted unexpectedly well. A stolen cow slaughtered and roasted over an open fire, its dripping fat making the flames dance. every part of the beast boiled into rich soup so nothing goes to waste. Those nights of abundance are etched in his memory. The taste of fresh meat, seasoned simply with smoke and hunger, and the rare feeling of a full belly before battle. But such feasts are fleeting on the campaign trail. More often, the soldier's diet is one of endurance: dried fish or salt pork, hard bread, and whatever wild roots or game can be foraged from the land. He eats with his dagger and his fingers, grease shining on unwashed hands, ever alert even as he chews. Around him, the dark encroaches beyond the firelight, and distant wolves howl. Still, for this moment, the warmth of the stew in his gut brings a measure of comfort. In the harsh brotherhood of war, a shared meal, no matter how plain, binds the band of mercenaries. They savor this small respite, heads bowed over tin cups, each man lost in the simple pleasure of hot food after a day of blood and mud. The soldier knows by dawn they will be on the move again, stomachs emptying as boots trudge through mire. But for now, under the silent stars, he closes his eyes and lets the taste of smoke, salt, and garlic linger on his tongue. A humble banquet at the edge of the battlefield, sustained by whatever providence has granted this day. In a great candle-lit hall miles away, a noble lord reclines at the high table beneath banners of his lineage. The air is thick with the lavish scents of roasted meats and exotic spices, a heady perfume of wealth. Golden light from iron candelabras dances across platters heaped with delicacies that most in the land could scarcely imagine. On polished silver trenchers lie cuts of venison and boar, roasted to a turn and glazed with honey and pepper. A whole suckling pig, apple in its mouth, commands the centre of the spread. Servants in fine livery move in graceful choreography, refilling goblets of spiced wine and bringing forth dish after elaborate dish. Before the meal began, the lord and his guests purified their hands in perfumed water poured from silver ewers, a genteel ritual of cleanliness and civility. Now they dine in measured elegance. Here, rank and ritual dictate all. The lord and lady sit elevated on the dais, while knights and courtiers array themselves according to favour and station down the long oak tables. Soft music from a lute weaves through the murmured conversation. Despite the abundance before them, they eat with deliberate grace, observing the subtle customs of the high-born. Personal knives, finely wrought and pointed, slice portions from the meats, and trenchers of fine white bread are used to soak up richly spiced gravies. Unlike the coarse rye loaf of the peasant, this manchet bread is made of the whitest sifted wheat flour, pillowy soft, and a symbol itself of status. Crystal pitchers and ornamental salt cellars, shaped like ships, adorn the table, for even salt and spice here are displayed as treasures. Small bowls of imported spices, cinnamon, ginger, and black pepper, stand openly on the board in elaborate containers, a bold show of opulence in a world where such seasonings are literally worth their weight in gold. With a casual pinch, the lord sprinkles a bit of rare saffron into his soup, tinting it a luxurious golden hue as those around admire the gesture. Every course that arrives is a performance of abundance and artistry. Now the feast reaches its crescendo of extravagance. From the kitchen, servants carry in a peacock pie, a magnificent roast peacock reassembled in full iridescent plumage. tail fanned high as if the bird were alive. Gasps of admiration whisper through the hall at the spectacle of blue and green feathers shimmering in the torchlight. Such a dish is not meant to be eaten for sustenance alone. It is a statement of the Lord's wealth, and a delight for the eyes as much as the tongue. Nearby, a swan roasted whole and gilded with a dusting of gold leaf sits as another edible marvel, its long neck arched in a pose of grace. The variety of meats is astounding. Tender venison haunches, spitted quail and pheasant, even curious delicacies like heron and hare, each paired with sauces of sweet spices or sharp verjuice to excite the palate. A stew of spiced fish from distant seas steams beside trays of sugared dates and figs brought by caravan from far-off lands. The guests sample these delights with eager curiosity. Their taste buds awash in salt, sweet, and spice all at once. The medieval palate of the elite revels in such complex mingling of flavors. A trout cooked in wine and ginger, a rabbit pie laced with currants and cloves, a sauce of almond milk and raisins served over roasted capon. Each bite is rich, novel, and often symbolic. Between courses, entertainers in bright garb perform subtle diversions, a minstrel's quiet song, a juggler's display. But the greatest entertainments are sometimes the food itself. As an entremet or subtlety, the cooks present a marvel to amaze the gathered nobility. On this eve, it appears in the form of a platter of golden apples. The ladies and gentlemen murmur in wonder, for upon closer look, these are no fruits at all, but tender meatballs, cleverly disguised in gilded pastry and aspic, scented with parsley and almond. Laughter and delight ripple along the benches as the guests appreciate the joke and artistry. A dish that is not what it seems, a culinary illusion crafted to amuse the eye and tongue alike. Such is the language of the noble table, where food carries meaning beyond hunger. A subtlety might honor a guest or make a political statement in sugared sculpture, all while entertaining those privileged enough to partake. And still the courses come. 3, 4, or even 5 removes of dishes, each heralded by servants with practiced flair. By the meal's end, trenchers, soaked with juices, are cleared away, and a spiced wine called hippocras is served warm in golden cups to aid digestion, its aroma of cinnamon and ginger rising like incense. The lord of the manor, contented, reclines as musicians play a final soothing air. In this hall, unlike the peasant's hut or the soldier's camp, there is no urgency or want, but rather a ceremonial indulgence. Leftovers from the feast will feed the household, and the poor at the gate come mourning, a customary charity of the great. But tonight the nobility revel in excess. Their tables boast the bounty of the world, from the rarest spices of the East to the fattest cattle of their own estates. Every element, from the fine white bread to the spiced hippocras, proclaims status and plenty. Here, beneath carved rafters and tapestries, dining is a form of theatre. The textures, crisp roast, silky sauce, tender pastry, and the vivid flavors of pepper and honey, mustard and mint, all weave together into an experience both sensory and symbolic. In this rarefied world, to eat is to display power and culture. And so the nobleman dabs his mouth with embroidered linen, smiling at his guests. Servants bearing silver basins move down the table once more so that each esteemed diner may wash the grease from their fingers. The candles gutter low as the night deepens. Sated and drowsy, the company retires from the hall one by one, passing from the golden glow of the feast back into the quiet dark of the castle corridors. The echoes of laughter and the sumptuous scents linger in the emptiness behind them. Thus ends the lofty banquet, a tableau of medieval life where, in one hall, food becomes spectacle, and the simple act of eating reveals the stratified reality of the world. From the humblest peasant's bread to the monk's orderly repast, the soldier's hardtack and the lord's dazzling feast, each meal a story of status, survival, and society in the age of faith and feasts. As autumn deepens and the days grow shorter, a quiet unease settles over the countryside. Fields that once shimmered with grain now stand bare and stubbled, their work finished for the year. The last carts creak home from the harvest, heavy with sacks of barley and rye, and the villagers count their stores with careful eyes. Each household measures what remains, not with scales, but with instinct learned over generations. They know how long a sack should last, how many loaves can be baked before the flour runs thin, how much must be set aside and how little may be eaten now so that something remains later. The air smells of damp earth and fallen leaves, and already the nights carry a sharper cold. In these weeks, food becomes not only nourishment, but calculation, patience, and restraint. In a small cottage, the hearth burns steadily as the family begins the long work of preparation. Shelves are lined with dried beans and peas, their pale shapes rattling softly in linen sacks when touched. Bundles of onions and garlic hang from the rafters, their papery skins whispering when the door opens. Apples and turnips are packed into crates of straw in the coolest corner of the house. The last loaves of fresh bread are baked thicker and heavier now, meant to last longer, their crusts dark and hard. Each item is placed with care, for once winter arrives, there will be no market stalls full of produce, no green shoots to gather from the hedgerows. What is here must be enough. As winter draws closer, fear creeps in quietly. It does not arrive with shouting or panic, but with small, persistent thoughts. Will the grain last until spring? Will the salt hold? Will the smoked meat stay sound? The mother stands by the storage chest at night, running her fingers along the wood as if counting its contents by touch. The father listens to the wind outside and wonders how many storms the roof can bear, how many weeks the firewood will last. Hunger is no stranger here. It is remembered in stories told softly by the hearth, in the memory of past winters when meals grew thinner and thinner, when the pot was filled more with water than grain. When the first snow falls, it blankets the world in silence. Paths disappear, fields vanish under white, and the village seems smaller, more fragile. Inside the cottage, the fire becomes the center of life. The pot is kept going day and night, its contents stretched and stretched again. A handful of barley is boiled until it bursts, then boiled again. Stale bread is soaked and stirred in to thicken the broth. Bones saved from autumn slaughter are returned to the pot, scraped clean and boiled once more, for whatever nourishment they can still give. Each meal is smaller than the last, but still warm, still shared. Days shorten further, and darkness comes early. Children huddle close to the hearth, their play subdued, their movements slow. Outside, animals are kept close, fed sparingly from the same stores that must last the humans. A goat's milk grows thin, eggs become rare. The taste of food changes in winter. It is plainer, more monotonous, but also more deeply appreciated. Every spoonful is eaten slowly. No crumb is left behind. In these months, hunger is not always sharp. Often it is a dull, constant presence, like the cold itself. Bellies are never quite full, but neither are they empty enough to cry out. People learn to live in this narrow space, between enough and not enough. They sleep more to conserve energy. Work slows, conversations soften. The church bells sound heavier in the cold air, calling people to prayer and reminding them that endurance is as holy as abundance. There are darker times, when winter stretches too long or the harvest was poor, then the fear deepens. Flour bins are scraped bare. Bread grows coarse and bitter as acorns or ground peas are mixed in. The stew thins to little more than hot water with a few floating grains. People forage even in snow, digging for frozen roots, chewing on dried leaves saved from summer. Mothers give their portions to children. Old men eat last, or not at all. In these moments, hunger becomes a quiet test of will and faith. Yet even in the worst winters, there are small mercies. A neighbour shares a loaf. A lord opens his granary, whether from charity or obligation. The church distributes thin soup to the poor. These gestures are remembered for years afterward, spoken of with gratitude long after the hunger fades. Food, in winter, binds the community as tightly as fear ever could. When at last the days begin to lengthen and the snow melts into mud, relief comes slowly. Spring is not abundance, but promise. The stores are nearly gone, but the earth begins to stir again. The hunger season loosens its grip, leaving behind thinner bodies and quieter hearts, but also a deep respect for the food that sustained them. The pot still simmers, the bread is still coarse, but hope returns with the first green shoots pushing through the soil. This rhythm, year after year, shapes every meal, every bite. Food is never just taste or habit. It is survival measured against the seasons, fear faced quietly, and endurance learned one winter at a time. As the long years pass and stories are whispered from hearth to hearth, there are truths about medieval food that rarely surface in polite conversation. They are not spoken loudly, yet everyone knows them. These truths live in the background of daily life, shaping habits, fears, and quiet decisions made when no one is watching. In the small kitchens of towns and villages, cleanliness is a fragile thing. Water must be fetched by hand, often from rivers shared with animals. Pots are rinsed but rarely scrubbed as one might wish. Wooden bowls absorb yesterday's broth and today's grease, carrying flavors forward, whether desired or not. This is not neglect, but necessity. Wood is cheap and warm to the touch, and clay cracks easily in the cold. Over time, meals blend into one another, and no one expects food to taste fresh in the way later centuries might imagine. Instead, familiarity becomes comfort. Grain, the foundation of life, carries its own dangers. Flour is ground between stone wheels, and tiny flecks of grit fall into the meal unnoticed. Bread crunches slightly under the teeth, not from seeds, but from stone dust. Over years, this wears teeth down to stumps. Toothache is common constant, and untreated. People learn to chew slowly, favoring one side of the mouth, accepting pain as part of eating. Mold is another quiet companion. In damp seasons, loaves grow green and white with bloom. Often the worst is cut away and the rest eaten. Bread is too precious to discard lightly. The taste is sharp and unpleasant, but hunger is worse. In the alehouse and the home, drink replaces water more often than not. Ale is weak, brewed quickly, and consumed daily, even by children. It spoils fast, turning sour within days. The flavor is uneven, sometimes sweet, sometimes sharp enough to sting the throat. Yet it is trusted more than clear water, which can bring sickness unseen. Wine, when available, is diluted and drunk warm, its acidity masking age and impurities. Drinking is not indulgence here, but survival by habit. Meat, when it appears, brings its own uneasy realities. Animals are slaughtered close to home, sometimes in the street or yard. Blood runs into the dirt, and flies gather quickly in warm weather. Timing is critical. Meat must be cut, salted, and cooked quickly before decay takes hold. In summer, the risk is constant. Even careful households lose food to rot. The smell of spoiled flesh is known and feared. When hunger is strong, judgment becomes difficult. There are times when meat that should have been discarded is instead boiled longer, seasoned heavier, and eaten with quiet hope that it will not bring illness. Fish, especially in coastal towns, is no safer. Catches sit in the sun before reaching market. Salt helps, but not always enough. Heads cloud, eyes sink, flesh softens. Buyers learn to trust their noses, pressing fingers into the meat, bargaining quickly. A bad choice can mean days of sickness. Still, fish is cheaper than meat, and often all that is available on fasting days. People eat it with caution, but they eat it. Milk spoils quickly as well. Without cooling, it turns sour within hours. This sour milk is not wasted. It becomes cheese, thick and sharp, or is drunk as it is. Butter goes rancid and is used anyway, its strong taste masked by herbs or spread thinly on hot bread. Eggs are prized, but even they are not always fresh. Cracked shells are common, and sometimes the smell tells the truth too late. In times of scarcity, boundaries shift. Things once considered inedible become acceptable. Bark is scraped from trees and ground into flour. Grass seeds are gathered and boiled. Animals not normally eaten, such as cats or dogs, vanish quietly from streets during hard winters. These acts are not spoken of afterward, but they are remembered. Hunger changes rules without asking permission. Markets, too, hide uncomfortable truths. Meat sellers may soak cuts in water to make them look heavier. Fish is sprinkled with salt to hide smell. Spices are used not only for flavor, but to disguise age. Pepper and cloves, when a household can afford them, serve as cover as much as seasoning. Everyone understands this, yet everyone participates. The line between cleverness and deceit is thin when survival is at stake. Even the wealthy are not immune. In great houses, leftovers are kept and reused until they are gone. Pies are baked to encase meat that might not survive another day on its own. Sauces are thick and heavily spiced. Their richness hiding what lies beneath. A noble may dine richly and still fall ill from food gone wrong. Rank offers abundance, not safety. Yet through all of this, people adapt. They develop instincts sharper than rules. They smell, touch, listen. They know when a pot has turned, when a loaf is too far gone, when a drink will soothe or sicken. Children learn these lessons early, watching their elders, absorbing knowledge without words. Survival depends on attention, not comfort. And strangely, these uncomfortable truths do not strip food of meaning. They deepen it. A warm bowl of stew, safe and filling, becomes a triumph. A loaf without mold is a gift. A meal that brings no pain afterward is remembered with relief. Eating is never casual. It is an act of trust in one's senses, in one's community, in the quiet hope that today's food will carry the body gently into tomorrow. As night falls again over the medieval world, kitchens darken and fires are banked low. The smells of smoke and broth linger in the air, clinging to clothes and hair. People lie down with full or half-full bellies, knowing that what they ate was imperfect, sometimes risky, often plain, yet enough. Enough to sleep, enough to rise again, enough to continue. As the fire settles into embers and the village drifts fully into night, there is no grand ending to the story of medieval food. There never was. Life does not conclude with abundance or revelation, only with routine gently resumed. In cottages and halls alike, the last sounds of eating fade. Bowls are scraped clean with fingers and bread crusts. Wooden spoons are rinsed in cold water and set aside. The pot, still warm, is nudged closer to the hearth so it may wait for morning. Smoke thins and rises slowly into the rafters, carrying with it the scent of grain, onion, and ash. Outside, the world grows quiet. Wind moves through bare branches. Somewhere far off, a dog barks once, then settles. People lie down as they have every night before. Bodies are tired, stomachs neither full nor empty, but calm enough to allow sleep. The day's food, whatever its form, has done its work. It has steadied hands, slowed hunger, and made rest possible. No one reflects on nutrition or balance. There is only the simple knowledge that eating happened, and because of it, tomorrow can begin. In the darkness, memories of meals blend together. No single dish stands out. What remains is a sense of sameness. Bread broken, stew ladled, cups passed hand to hand. Weeks and years blur into one long pattern of nourishment, shaped by soil, weather, and chance. Food is never a hobby, never a pleasure, pursued for its own sake. It is the quiet thread that ties each day to the next. Even the wealthy, drifting into sleep beneath heavy blankets, carry this truth with them. Their tables were fuller, their plates richer, yet their bodies depend on the same fragile chain of harvest, storage, and preparation. Spoilage, sickness, and scarcity wait for no rank. Beneath silk and stone, they are bound to the same rhythms as the poorest labourer. As the moon crosses the sky, kitchens everywhere rest. The millstones are still, the ovens cool. The market stalls stand empty until dawn. Nothing is consumed now, nothing is prepared. The medieval world holds its breath for a few hours, suspended between hunger and hunger again. And in that stillness lies the final understanding. What people actually ate in medieval Europe was not defined by recipes or choice, but by repetition and endurance. Food was whatever could be grown, saved, stretched, and trusted. It was shaped by fear of winter, by respect for scarcity, and by the quiet discipline of making do. Tomorrow, the same hands will rise again. Grain will be measured. Water will be poured. The pot will be stirred. Bread will be cut. Not because it is desired, but because it is necessary. The fire will be lit. The day will begin. And so, beneath the soft cover of night, the story rests. Not finished, only paused, waiting, as it always has, for morning.